Ciao a tutti, oggi siamo qui con Samantha Shannon e la sua recentissima pubblicazione Un giorno di notte cadente, in questa meravigliosa edizione di Oscar Holt che verrà pubblicato in Italia il 28 di novembre, quindi brevissimo. Adesso inizierò a fare qualche domanda all'autrice, più in generale proprio sulle sue opere, così che possiate farvi anche un'idea di quelle che sono le sue idee sulla scrittura, sui draghi e in generale proprio su questa serie di libri ambientati nello stesso universo narrativo. As a fantasy writer myself, I'm really curious about the creative process leading to the direction of a more classical narrative structure on which inevitably epic and high fantasy rely on. So my question is, how do you think your books are successful in merging these past elements with all these new social instances in such a diversified and also saturated publishing landscape?
Yeah, sure. Well, The Priory of the Orange Tree was, in a way, written exactly like you say. It was supposed to be quite a classic quest fantasy where the characters come together to defeat a common threat. So it's just a classic story of the enemy rising after 1,000 years, and there's this huge fire-breathing dragon. But these things I know are kind of staples of the genre. But I really wanted it to be focused on women and queer people, and just not people who the genre has generally been more catered to, which has been kind of white, straight men. So I really just wanted to tell a classic story, but to just change who that story was focused on. And particularly when I was young, I felt like I was always searching for the female characters in stories, and they were often side characters, and I would really, really cling to those characters. So, like when I saw the Lord of the Rings film, I really clung on to characters like Arwen and Eowyn. And I remember when I went to read Lord of the Rings after I saw the film, because I was about 10 when Lord of the Rings came out, so I went straight to the bookshop and I wanted to see the scene where Arwen kind of takes Frodo away from Nazgul. And then in the book, Arwen doesn't do that. It's a male elf who does that, and it kind of broke my heart. And I didn't read.
Quite sad.
It is a little sad. I was really upset by it, and because I was searching desperately for the scene in the book, and I realised it's just kind of it is there, but Arwen is not the character who does that. And I kind of stopped reading fantasy for a while after that, until I discovered Sabriel by Garth Nix.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think Garth Nix is a really lovely guy, and he kind of returned me to reading fantasy again. I've always been very grateful for Sabriel because of that, because it's just so relentlessly focused on this really capable female character, and I really just wanted to write something that my younger self would have needed, I think.
Yeah, that's great. As a fantasy reader, I've always searched for female characters, and they were mostly male, so it was quite sad, and I did not feel represented.
Yeah, and I think we are really lucky that the genre has changed so much now, and I feel like we're in such a golden era of women writing fantasy, and there's so many kind of stories being told now, and I think that's great. And we can always do more, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and in these new books there are also a lot of women.
Yes, this one particularly. Is like, I mean, The Priory of the Orange Tree is also very focused on women, but there's more of an even split of narrators, for example, like there's 2 men and 2 women. This one is really supposed to be about motherhood and mothers and daughters and women's relationship with motherhood throughout our lives. For me, as someone who does not want to be a mother, and I've always known that since I was very young, and I felt like that was often not really represented that much in fantasy books, certainly. And I just really wanted to devote this entire book to that subject. So there's obviously a lot of other stuff going on, like a dragon and stuff, but it's very much focused on mothers and daughters and women who have different perspectives on motherhood. So some of them really want to be mothers, some of them don't, some of them are reluctant mothers, and some of them are mothers who've lost their children, so it's just supposed to be a very broad kind of cover of that topic.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So moving on, I really like to talk about dragons.
Yes,
because they are really a big passion of mine, and so they are also a prominent part of the Priory, and I guess they'll also be in this new book.
Oh yes.
From the cover. So I want to ask you, what do you think? How do you think they can still be interesting in the new books without being ordinary? Because we had a lot of dragons for ages in fantasy literature. How can they be not boring in fantasy?
Well, I think every author and creator brings a different take to dragons. You know, there's so many different ways that you can make them interesting or make them your own. Like, there's not really any rules about dragons. I mean, I suppose there's, you know, commonalities between them, but you can really essentially do whatever you like with them. So for me personally, what I did was, first of all, I knew I wanted to have talking dragons, because I feel like there aren't enough talking dragons, and one of the films that got me into dragons when I was younger was a film called Dragonheart, which...
Oh my god, I love that!
Oh thank god, like so many people haven't seen it, and it stresses me out so much. It's like a Scottish dragon, it's amazing. But so I loved that film, and I loved it specifically because the main dragon in it, Draco, talks, and he's quite funny and very moving as well. So I really wanted to bring talking dragons into the Priory of the Orange Tree. So that was
there is a big difference between talking and not talking dragons.
Yes, the ones in Game of Thrones don't talk, and they feel a lot more kind of almost animalistic, almost, I suppose. Like they clearly are intelligent, but they just have a slightly different feel to them. So for me, I wanted to have talking dragons and non-talking dragons, so you can pretty much get every kind of dragon in this book. And I wanted to have both water dragons and fire dragons, so I basically build the magic system from the contrast between those two. So I have the fire-breathing dragons coming from underneath the earth, so they're kind of born from the core of the world, and then the water dragons come from a star that comes every few centuries, and that was where they originated. And yeah, I just find them fascinating, and I also wanted them to be reflections of nature in a way. So one of the things I wanted to do with the main dragon in the Priory of the Orange Tree, he's called the Nameless One. And I don't really think of him as being like an evil character. So he's technically an antagonist because he wants to destroy the world. So obviously the main characters don't like him. But for me, he's more like extreme weather in a way. Like he's kind of like something like a tornado. So he doesn't want to destroy because he's evil. Like he doesn't have a purpose for doing that. But his instinct is to destroy because his nature is chaotic. So that's kind of the way that I was asking myself the question, like, why would some dragons be able to communicate with humans and live alongside them, and some of them would want to destroy them and be evil? Because there's so many stories worldwide about dragons, and some of them do show dragons who are good, and others show dragons who are kind of evil and almost satanic in nature. So I wanted to think about why that would be in my world, so I came up with this idea that they're either chaotic or more in harmony with nature.
Ok, thanks a lot, that's really interesting. Ringrazio tantissimo Samantha Shannon, thank you Samantha for this quick interview. Vi invito tutti a leggere Un giorno di notte cadente, e se non l'avete ancora fatto ovviamente anche Il priorato dell'albero delle arance. Ciao!